thank y'all for joining us this morning. A lot of work has gone into this document. Matthew's spent many hours getting this thing prepared. We really are grateful that y'all are all here. We're looking for as much feedback as we can possibly get. We know this is a tough subject in the industry, and it's new to us, and it's something that we need to work through, and we've been trying to do that. So please know that we need your input. We plan to have another draft following this one based on the input that we received. So thank you very much for joining us today. And Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. Like Thomas said, I'm Matthew Cherry, the marketing practices attorney for TABC. And before we kind of get started, I've noticed we do have a lot of our industry counterparts and regulators from other states. So I'd like to also say welcome to y'all and thank you for being here and taking time out of your day. So let's see, we put out the first draft of this advisory back in October. We've done a lot of work to try to make some updates after interfacing with industry. So I'll kind of go over some of that, but I'd like to open the floor for the majority of the time to allow people to make comments and to hopefully kind of facilitate a larger discussion about what we've written so far. So the advisory kind of as a whole focuses on two main areas, the business to consumer type platforms and the business to business type platforms. A lot of the changes that you'll probably see from the first draft really do pertain to the business to business platforms. But I'll start with kind of just going through it in order. And first off is the stuff that talks about the business to consumer platforms. So a majority of our focus here really is looking at prohibited slotting fees and paid advertising. That could be a problem with utilizing third parties. And as I go down, let's see. So what we did here first is, we made it clear looking at the rules that allow online advertising. It's very clear that retailers are allowed to do that. Next, the advisory kind of goes into just an overview of the prohibited things of value and inducement provisions. And then we try to make it very clear that all of those provisions, even though they're going to be, even though they normally apply to the brick and mortar locations, we view all of the e-commerce platforms just as an extension of the physical locations that retailers operate in. We also go into making it clear that we view digital advertisements as the same as in-store signage. And we do have specific rules that make it very clear that in-store signage is allowed to be provided to a retailer. However, the retailer needs to maintain control over all the placement of those ads, how they want it to be viewed on their e-commerce platform, the length of time they want it to be up there. And one of the concerns that we have with that is payments coming from the supplier tier that are going to kind of essentially force a retailer to keep an ad up for a certain period of time, or to place it on maybe, let's say, the top of their retailer page, and or have their product kind of be at the top of the pages as well. And if you're looking at like the hierarchy of where products are going to be displayed. Then one of the other things that we did with this, let me scroll back up. We did try to, you'll see a lot of references to a retailer branded website, page, or platform. And so we did try to include a definition of what we considered to be a retailer branded page. And essentially it's going to be anything that's on a retailer facing website. Like if I owned, let's say, Matt's Liquor and you went to mattsliquor.com, that's clearly a retailer branded page. If I was a third party and I operated a delivery service, let's say that's Matt's delivery service, and I'm linking consumers to specific retailers that do hold a license or a permit, then anything that's on my platform that is specifically referencing the specific retailer that holds a license or permit, or if it's going to use their trademarks or any other form of that retailer's trade dress, we would also view that as a retailer branded page. And the main update that we have to that with this portion of the advisory is we did try to make it clear that there is an avenue for, especially on the third-party platforms that are unlicensed, there's an avenue to allow supplier-funded advertising, but that can't be connected to a specific retailer, and there has to be separation from that. So again, if I am a third party and I operate Matt's delivery service, and I wanted to accept maybe some supplier advertising or supplier funds for advertising, I could do that. And let's say I would send out an email blast to all of my all the consumers that maybe signed up for my platform or something. I could do that as long as that blast or that email or anything, or maybe it's a tweet or something that's going to include the advertisement. As long as that is not connected to a specific retailer, then we don't see a problem with that. It's when it gets connected to a specific retailer or it shows up on the retailer branded page that we think that then will kind of cross the line and be some sort of either prohibited thing of value, or essentially could also be a slotting fee, which would also then be a form of inducement. And then let's see, the next portion is really going to be changes that we have updated to the business to business side of platforms. I will say that I think initially in the prior draft, there was kind of unintentionally this view that we were trying to say that there's not as many concerns with the tied house provisions for the business to business platforms as there are for the business to consumer platforms. And so we try to make that really clear in this draft that that's not the case. All of those provisions, apply equally. There's just different types of concerns with those platforms because instead of focusing on third parties that may be dealing with a consumer and really focusing on kind of one tier, the business to business platforms automatically are going to involve more than one tier because there's an interface between two tiers of the industry that hold a license or a permit. I think one of the biggest issues or maybe hurdles for these types of platforms are going to be, you'll see this kind of on, I think it's the last page. The code contains a lot of agent provisions, and those agents do not have to be licensed by TABC. But part of the issue with that is there's a lot of prohibitions in there that will state that once an entity that's unlicensed is kind of operating on behalf of or facilitating the privileges of a licensed business in one of the three tiers, they then are kind of stuck in that tier and cannot move on over and also perform those same functions as an agent for a member of another tier. And so I think that's one of the probably the largest hurdles that we see for these business to business platforms. That doesn't mean that they're not allowed. I think we do make it clear early on that kind of just as a baseline, if all that the platform is doing is really just facilitating the ordering process, kind of in the same manner as what happens currently. Let's say if you're a distributor and you normally, accept orders from a retailer through email. If you're now kind of using new technology to extend that to an online application or something, and it's not providing any other type of service or thing of value maybe to a retailer, then there's not a problem with that. I think the issue might arise more when there's a little bit more functionality that's happening within that platform that's allowing that to be used in the retailer as it's operating its business that goes beyond just ordering products. I think that actually now kind of really does cover the updates that we've made and lets y'all know kind of the direction that the agency is going in. So I'd like to start opening things up so we can have a discussion and kind of hear everyone's comments. Right before we do that too, though, I would also like to add, I'm not a technology person, so there might be a lot of terms in here that people that are very tech savvy view as a term of art. You'll probably see me use phrases like website, platform, application, kind of all over the place. It would also be helpful if we need to be more clear about using certain terms because they are kind of common within the industry and within the tech side of things. So that would be beneficial as well. And we'd also like to know if people think that we got something completely wrong, if we need to look at some other code provisions that people think that also could come into play. We definitely want to do that. And like Thomas said, we do plan on including or updating this and having another kind of draft before this gets finalized.
Hey, Matthew, Dewey here. I'll kick it off unless you have anything else.
No, that works. I'm just trying to bring up the chat screen so I can see if anybody has their hands raised. Is that up? Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, definitely. Let's start doing.
Well, thanks to you and Thomas and everybody on your team for taking the time and effort to address these issues. I appreciate that TABC is not technophobic and realizes that these digital platforms or websites or whatever you want to call them are the wave of the future, and they're not going away anytime soon. I think the days of big chief tablets and paper forms on carbon paper, that is in the trash bin of history. And I am cognizant and appreciative that TABC is is business friendly. Texas is a business friendly state, and I know TABC is a business friendly agency. But I also know that you guys don't want to be in the business of picking winners and losers in this, budding corner of the commercial garden, as it was referenced, as long as the 3-tier system and the tied house provisions of the alcoholic beverage code are maintained. I am a little concerned about getting a little too far ahead of the skis, and, you're in the business of calling strikes and balls, not, pitching. And I do suspect we're likely to see some legislation on this on the next session. It wouldn't surprise me. So hopefully, we'll see how that plays out, but you may be getting some more statutory direction on that in the future. I just have some kind of 30,000 foot view comments, and then I think Marcus may follow up later with some more details. But I think the first big issue, at least in my mind, is the whole idea of, something of value, that, providing software is something of value. And I do appreciate just your last comment that if it's a pure ordering platform, that might be okay. But I think, there's so many exceptions to the general rule of one tier can't give another tier something of value that I think the exceptions have basically swallowed the rule. As you guys well know, all these TABC permits are personal privileges, but, since the beginning of time, right, wholesalers have connected to their retailers via their in-person sales forces, and they've provided many different methods to allow retailers to order alcoholic beverages with them. As time has progressed, obviously that has evolved from paper forms to telephone, web-based platforms. Now we have, I know I see wholesalers and with their mobile or iPad applications that they sit down and order with retailers. And I really think these digital platforms, whether they're manufacturer-based, wholesaler-based, retailer-based, or third-party based, can comply with the code requirements in that regard. I mean, I do remember back when I was a baby lawyer in the 90s, right? The wholesaler reps would get a route book, usually provided for from the manufacturer with forms and, past inventory levels, shelf placement, templates, all that other stuff. And to the extent that any of these platforms, to your point, continue with current practices in an updated modern form, I don't see how that's going to affect and skew the level playing field that we have out there now. So, if these can be constructed in such a manner that they're simple tools to make efficient order placement, I don't see how anybody can really complain about that. So bottom line, I don't think the use of technology software by and of itself is something of value that affects market choices for retailers. I mean, as you will know, there's lots of exceptions, as I mentioned earlier. Digital product display enhancements in Bulletin 36. You got the cooler door racks in Marketing Practice Bulletin 6. There's that old draft equipment letter ruling on, what keg equipment you can provide and what keg equipment you can't provide. Obviously, we have all the de minimis marketing rules under 45-117 and 45-119. Advertising on wholesale delivery vehicles, obviously all the interior and exterior signage that upper tier members can give to retailers, and then, your regular old bar spin. So I just, in and of itself, I think whether it's a manufacturer or a wholesaler, making the use of a software platform available to retailers, it does not fall under, something of value to the extent that, again, the level playing field is jeopardized. To me, issue number 2 is, potential pay to play. Now, I obviously absolutely agree that we can't pay to play. That's not the way this industry is set up, unlike chips and soda and most other products. But I can, easily envision a platform that's compliant that allows retailers to place orders, check invoices, make payments, service the retailer's territory, provide retailers with whatever wholesaler information like delivery dates, accounts receivable, sales rep contacts, right? I don't think that's anything that's not going on now. I think it's probably more compliant if the manufacturer does not own that technology platform. But I don't see any reason that they can't make it available to wholesalers and then wholesalers make it available to their retailers for use, as long as the wholesalers aren't cut out. I don't think anybody on this call wants well, maybe not anybody, but most of my clients do not want like the 3-tier system and want to keep that in place, as long as, again, we keep it all fair and square. I think tied into that, any platforms provided by a manufacturer or wholesaler to retailers, it's got to be voluntary, right? It's got, whether it's the retailer or the wholesaler, if they don't want to use the app, they don't have to use the app. If they have their own app, there's plenty of retailer apps out there now to provide ordering platforms. So, as long as people can pick and choose, and then I don't see any issue with that. Obviously, that's going to tie in with the inducement rule that I'll get to. But again, if wholesalers in the wholesaler context, as long as they have complete independent authority to determine what products, prices, discounts, what promotions they want to list on the platform, again, no different than what's happening today. I also think that it's important, if it's manufacturer supplied, that wholesalers are given the right to order any product that the wholesaler sells, not just the manufacturer's brands, right? I would say most, if not all, wholesalers in Texas, work with multiple suppliers. And if one supplier wants to provide some software to help smooth out the ordering process, as long as that wholesaler can use it for any of their brands and pass along to their retailers, in that regard, I think it's agnostic, which is important. I think all of these can be customizable, right? Or at least the ones I've seen. So whether it's a wholesaler or retailer, if they want to tweak it and have it their own special format or font or whatever, I think that again goes to independence of the tiers. Banner ads and push notifications. I don't see that as being an issue, and I'll get into that more detail because I have a whole point on advertising. But I don't think there's anything wrong with manufacturers making recommendations or sample communications that a wholesaler could use. But again, whether they want to take that advice and use it or do their own thing, as long as it's an independent decision of the wholesaler, then I don't see that that's violating any of the tier rules or the tied house laws. Again, tied into the inducement rule in 45.110, right? Retailers can't be required to purchase one manufacturer's product in order to use the platform or in order to have access to any of the products or promotions. So to the extent that these platforms are funneling and again, tipping that level playing field, then I would have a concern. But I think there's plenty of ways that these platforms can be constructed to take care of that concern. So, I think on this issue, I would, summarize by just saying we've had these types of things forever. It's just evolved with technological advances. And as long as the wholesale license holder can exercise their privilege and the retailer without violating the tied house laws, software in and of itself is not a thing of value that we have to worry about. I know you're very aware and cognizant of the inducement rule, right? But the criteria for determining retailer independence, right? Does it restrict or hamper free economic choice? Is the retailer obligated to participate? Does the retailer have a continuing obligation to purchase? Retailer is not forced to terminate a relationship with somebody else with respect to a purchase order. And it involves the manufacturing or wholesale tier and the day-to-day operations of the retailer. That's in those, the example in the rule is if you're controlling the retailer's decisions, right? And I've seen those before, right? Where some buyer's rep camps out on corporate headquarters and says, buy this, that, or the other. I don't think, again, that's going to happen. Well, not that it couldn't happen, but as long as these are programmed in such a way that that's not happening, I think we're fine. The last one, bullet point in that rule is that it's not discriminatory and it's offered to all retailers in the local market with the same terms. So again, I think most of these platforms can be programmed to be in a compliant manner and address those. I think on the B2C side, it gets interesting, right? Where some of these B2Cs are licensed, some of these are not licensed. For the unlicensed B2Cs, I think you guys have already addressed a lot of these issues in marketing practices bulletin 56, right? Where you basically said, and you made this comment at the beginning, Matthew, which I appreciate, but as long as we have that proper flow of funds in the ordering process, such that the wholesaler or the retailer, as the case may be, has control over who sets the prices, make sure you have the funds inured to the proper party, properly escrowed, or however they're going to handle the payment. And, key being to me on these B2Cs, right, the wholesaler's got to have the right to accept or deny the order. If they're going to give up their price sheet and their inventory levels to these B2Cs so that a consumer can effectuate a purchase, that's fine and dandy, but that's also got to be voluntary, right? And that, on their end, that shouldn't fall into those inducement concerns that we have. So whether it's retailer based, manufacturer based, wholesaler based, third party based, all of these are out there now. I think it's really the same issues that we have to be concerned about. But again, as long as it's integrated in a proper way, it's no different than, today, for example, right? If a wholesaler rep makes his order run, visits his accounts, they're probably either via text message or email, driving over at the end of the day and pulling over at the side of the road and entering all that into the route accounting system. I think some of these apps can take that burden off those sales reps and allow them to spend more face-to-face time with their clients and, try to increase their sales through what they're paid for, which is, increasing sales. I think the last point I'd like to make, and then I'll stop talking, is advertising, right? I know there's a lot of concerns about the advertising dollars. I don't disagree that manufacturers and wholesalers can't pay to advertise for a specific retailer, right? I always go back to the signs. If I provide a generic sign, whether it's, currently beer and I guess soon to be official for spirits and wine, a wholesaler upper tier can provide signs all day long. They just can't specialize that for the retailer. So, to me, this is kind of like a banner ad. If you're just having a banner ad that you're paying a B2C third-party advertising guy and it's going to flash across the screen X many times a day, that's a lot different than saying, come enjoy manufacturer A's beer at retailer Z. I think the other kind of big issue on advertising, and this is out there now, is, as you well know, Matthew, MPB 31, that allows upper tier members to pay retailers today for shelf space and advertising as in the non-alcoholic beverage field, right? So that's happening now, right? If there's a wholesaler that also delivers food and chips and soda, they can pay to play for chips and food and soda. They just can't pay to play for alcoholic beverages. And obviously that MPB 31 stresses that you have to set up these Chinese walls to ensure that paying to play for chips and soda doesn't bleed over into alcoholic beverages. I think that bulletin's over 10 years old, and to my knowledge, I don't think there's any cases that TABC's instituted. Of course, I could be wrong about that part, but to my knowledge, that's not been a big issue in the industry or concern about upper tier members paying for advertising in the non-alcoholic beverage sphere. And a lot of these apps and portals are going to have not just alcohol, right? They're going to have chips, soda, those types of things. And again, to the extent that that can be carved out, and if there is any revenue share for advertising that's going back to a retailer, whether it's a third party or a retailer direct website, as long as any alcoholic beverage manufacturer or wholesaler revenues are carved out of that revenue share, then I think that's right in line with current practices under MBP 31. There's, lots of different third-party advertisings, whether it's on websites, screens, inside retail establishments. I mean, those are all out there now. And again, as long as you keep those Chinese walls up, I think they're compliant. So those are my 4 big issues, and I won't get into the weeds on specifics. I know others might have comments on that, but I appreciate you guys looking at this, and obviously happy to assist in any way we can to get a good final product out of this.
Okay, great. No, thank you. I think you made a lot of really good points and a lot that we would agree with kind of on a basic level, especially just looking at giving over maybe software in general is not necessarily going to be a prohibited thing of value at all. And I don't think it automatically makes platforms a problem either. And I think you were kind of hitting on this. It's really going to be dependent on the different functionalities within that platform and kind of how it's working. And as long as it's still allowing retailer independence. I mean, especially with all these thing of value and inducement provisions, the focus is not really on the supplier giving something to the middle tier. It's really how stuff is going to get used and then provided over to the retailer and whether or not it impacts the retailer independence. So that's definitely something that we are looking at. And there is an avenue to allow a lot of these platforms in a lawful way. Just, it's going to depend a little bit on how they function. And we will definitely take a look at the MPA 31, the stuff that talks about funds for non-alcoholic products, and see if we can kind of incorporate that in here and make that a little bit clear. Just that advisory is still alive and well, and we still have the same viewpoint as we did basically a decade ago. So thank you. See, I think next up we have one question about have there been any updates to winery license holders who would like to publish tasting events on their website? I will say, I think some of that got addressed in one of our prior tasting advisories, but I'll go back and double check that. And if we need to add anything to make that clear, we definitely can. That is just not really the focus of what we're looking at with this specific advisory, but we'll definitely take a look at that and see if there needs to be anything to be made more clear within the tasting advisory. I believe that was updated, I want to say within the past like 2 or 3 months. Yeah, okay, yeah. The next question is, can you address the base rationale for allowing unlicensed third parties to operate in the 3-tier system, especially when their behavior subjects my license to potential jeopardy? Okay, I think that's a really good question. I will say the way that we view a lot of these third parties that are unlicensed, we don't see them necessarily as kind of operating in the 3-tier system in the sense of exercising the exact privileges of a permit and license holder. Most of the time, their functions, they are somewhat acting as an agent, especially when they're facilitating sales or something, which is authorized for the license holder. And in that viewpoint, once they're kind of acting as an agent of that permittee or licensee, they kind of de facto become, at least temporarily for that transaction, part of and connected to that license or permit holder. So that's one way that we think that they are definitely allowed to operate and still be unlicensed. And I will also say, I mean, almost everything that we've looked at, or everyone that's kind of come to us with these platforms, there's also some sort of contractual agreement that is going on in the background, linking the unlicensed third party with the licensed and permit holder. So I think kind of for those kind of two overarching reasons are why we believe that, you know, there's an avenue to still allow the unlicensed third party businesses to have some sort of operations. And then, okay, it looks like next we have some hands raised. Looks like Jackie Flug.
Hi, Matthew. Good morning. And a big mazel tov to Mr. Graham on the new position. I just wanted to ask two brief questions on the B2C platforms. You had mentioned that the retailer needs to be in control of such things as how long an ad would last and product placement. And my question is it permissible for the retailer to assign those decision-making abilities or rights to a unlicensed third party?
That is a very good question. I think there's an avenue for that. That is something that I think we can kind of touch on more in the advisory. It's difficult to say right now specifically because that kind of creates, I guess, an additional kind of hard link between the licensed business and then the third party. But I don't think that would necessarily be a problem. We're going to have to discuss that and kind of see internally what we want to say about that. But I think it's a really good point and something that we can definitely add in.
Okay, so that question was about just the decision-making authority. With or without this advisory, is it permissible for a retailer to use an unlicensed third party to sell product placement and banner ads for their e-commerce website?
Can you say that again? It started to cut out.
Oh, sorry. With or without this advisory, say you even shove this advisory in a drawer and it never sees the light of day. Is it permissible for a retailer to use an unlicensed third party to sell product placement and banner ads for their e-commerce website?
I think that sounds like it's something that would start to dive into some of these prohibitions on the special advertising or distribution services. So to me, that sounds like something that could definitely be a problem. And depending on the specifics of it, sounds like it would probably be a violation.
Thanks.
Looks like next up, we have a hand raised from Lance Lively.
Good morning, Matthew. Congrats again to Thomas Graham on his appointment as executive director, and thank you to you and the staff for working on this. I know this is a very complex and complicated issue. We have a number of concerns about, where the blame is being placed, et cetera. I would hearken back to Marketing Practice Advisory or Bulletin number 27. These things carry the weight of law. If you look at that one, which was published in 2009, it says that if a retailer doesn't catch basically breakage in an order within 48 hours, that you can't get a refund on it because it's considered a consignment sale when 48 hours doesn't appear in the statute anywhere. So for the last 13 years, we've been living under that bulletin as law. And my friends in the wholesale tier are laughing right now because they've heard me complain about this for the last 13 years. My point in saying that is that I think we need to be careful about advisories and bulletins and the weight that they carry in this industry, and be very careful. At the end of the day, a tied house violation is still illegal, as well as a slotting fee. And if you can make the case, and I think you have done so well in parts of this, that's occurring, I support that, and we're not against it. I do think there's a lot of gray area. Advertising promotes and benefits the entire industry. Is there a benefit or a thing of value if the American Statesman runs a Crown Royal Apple full page ad, and next to it is a Tyler's Liquor Store full page ad, wherein Tyler has Crown Apple on sale for whatever. Tyler's Liquor Store is getting a benefit, Crown Royal's getting a benefit. So I think that if you look at and drill down on this against print advertising, print media, social media, et cetera, we worry that some lines are going to be crossed, and again, a lot of gray here. I would also recommend that you strategically place the word knowingly throughout the document. We did that in 2019 on some legislation that I know the agency was interested in terms of filling out paperwork, albeit on your permit application, et cetera. And at the time, as it was written, we were going to be potentially caught or fined or warned or given a ticket on that when we accidentally fill out paperwork. So we submitted and entered the word knowingly into that statute. Everybody agreed that sometimes people make mistakes, and we need to be careful about going after folks who have not by any problem on their own, but just by the sheer fact that they have no idea that a third-party platform is doing what they're doing. So I think we need to be careful with that. We are happy and ready to work on this and continue on. I think this thing could be edited down quite frankly down to one page because again, at the end of the day, these violations are still violations. And if somebody's receiving benefit or financial benefit from another tier, that's still against the law. And I think you've done a good job of making that case in parts of this, but I still think a lot of this is very gray. And I think the alcohol lawyers and litigators on this call are licking their chops because we're going to see some lawsuits out of this. So I hope we get it right going in, because again, at the end of the day, this advisory is going to hold the weight of statutory law. So that's my comment and I'll step aside. Thanks.
Thank you, much appreciated. I really especially like that idea of kind of throwing in the stuff with using the term knowingly in front of stuff. Our intent definitely is not for someone to kind of accidentally walk into something that could be a potential violation when they really didn't understand that this other kind of third party was facilitating that violation. They had no idea that this was going on. So I think that that's very helpful, and we can look at kind of adding some sort of maybe intent type standard into this. Looks like next hand we have up is Tyler Rudd.
Good morning. I'm going to start my video so y'all can see my face. This is not Tyler from Tyler's Liquor Store. This is Tyler from the Wine Institute. And I just wanted to start by saying that we really appreciate y'all putting this forward. I think that there's definitely some nefarious things that are happening, although you know, how nefarious is yet to be determined. I think Wine Institute's biggest concern are the slotting fees, which I know is difficult to determine what is and what is not a slotting fee in the digital world. But it's nice to see that we have that y'all are looking at it, because if it's occurring, then it definitely needs to stop, and having some guidelines on that would be very helpful. And to that point, I think just a couple of things. When it comes to using phrases like online platforms, digital storefronts, digital platforms, etc., they're used throughout this interchangeably, it seems like, and I don't know if that was intentional or if you just maybe need to define what you mean by a digital platform or an online platform. Are they the same thing? Are they different? Just for consistency and clarity's sake. Also, I guess one of the questions that we had was, and Dewey kind of brought it up with advertising, what does TABC view as a banner ad? Is that an advertisement? A pop-up ad, is that an advertisement? What I think if we had more clarity on what is and is not allowed, that would be helpful for us to know. And just, you know, I don't even know if you're able to do that because it is kind of a murkier world when you're not in a physical store. But if we had some clarity on that, that would be very helpful. I think ultimately for us, what we'd like to see is, you know, obviously, as Lance put it, a three-tier violation is a three-tier violation. And just finding ways to just determine what is a slotting fee in the digital world and what is allowed for all of these third-party platforms to be able to do and not do. One of our concerns is just that it's we want to, as much as we possibly can, have a level playing field, and companies that have a lot of money to spend on advertising, that's one thing. Another thing to have a lot of money for advertisements that put their products first, which we view as a slotting fee. Some smaller wineries, breweries, distilleries will not have the money to be able to do that, and that puts those at a disadvantage. So then that's the whole point of slotting fees being illegal. So I guess for us, just we like what you're doing, we like the way you're headed, but some more clarity on those things would be very helpful.
Definitely, we can start looking at that and kind of incorporate some more specifics, especially on the different kind of types of advertisements and what we're kind of considering lawful maybe versus unlawful, and when it's going to be maybe just kind of an in-store sign that is allowed versus maybe a prohibited type of form of advertising. So we can definitely kind of expand on that. It looks like next hand up again is Jackie.
I'm really sorry. I just wanted to respond to something Lance had said. And Lance, I know you're speaking from the retailer view, and I think what you're saying is correct, that most retailers are not going to know the inner workings of the myriads of platforms that are out there that they're signed up with. That information may not even be available to them. So I understand the knowingly component on the retailer side. However, when it comes to the supplier side, when you have massive suppliers who are contracting with retailers for slotting fees on their e-commerce websites, I don't know how much more knowingly that could be. So I think there are two, there's a tied house violation. It takes two parties to have a tied house violation. And I see how the knowledge component would be different between the retailer and the suppliers who are doing this.
Thank you. Looks like real quick, we have some other questions that have just come in. So I think it's Rachel Hooper has asked what the definition of e-commerce is as used in this advisory. I would say essentially it's just standing for electronic commerce. So stuff that's moving away from the brick and mortar locations to the internet. And then next was, what has TABC done to understand how digital advertising works? I will say what we really have done is meet with people that have come to us about their platforms and tried to explain them and explained how they're using digital advertisements, within the industry. So I don't want to make it seem like we think that we know everything about digital advertising, because that is not, within our specific bailiwick. What we do is regulate the industry and administer the entire code. And obviously digital advertising is one very tiny piece. So if you think that we're kind of missing something and we're kind of not fully understanding or grasping how digital advertising works and something needs to be incorporated into this, I'd be happy to set up a meeting with you and you can kind of explain like your thoughts and let us know maybe what you think we need to know or kind of expand on. And then it looks like another question is from Bob Hunt. Is the draft bulletin in response to specific violations that the TABC is aware of, or is the TABC working to get ahead of the e-commerce curve, or both? If the former, can you share what was the nature of the violations? I will say initially what spawned this is we got multiple businesses coming with us saying, hey, can you kind of rubber stamp with a yes, our platform, and tell us that everything is good to go and there's no violations. And we started looking at some, and before we did that, we realized there's just no possible way that we could do that for every business that has a platform and everything out there. And I'll be honest, in a lot of those kind of discussions, it's difficult to fully understand every single function that platform is kind of operating within. So it's hard to give a big rubber stamp. So we thought the best way to do that then was to focus on doing an advisory and try to let the industry and unlicensed businesses know, okay, look, these are the rule and the code provisions that we think would apply to these scenarios. This is what people need to look at so they can kind of use the advisory as guideposts when they're kind of developing a platform or a website, or when they're going to enter into a contract with maybe some other third parties. And then let's see, kind of the other side of your question is about specific violations. I will say, as we've done this, there has been some stuff that we have seen online that looks honestly like a clear slotting fee. It's something that we are aware of, but I will say right now, there's no intent all of a sudden while we're in this process of drafting the advisory and putting out what we see as those guideposts of trying to take action on somebody. I think at the moment, what we're really trying to do is let industry know, like, look, this is kind of what's good, what's okay, what's not going to be allowed. And I do not foresee the agency trying to take any action, at least until this is formalized and we kind of give some sort of period of time for industry to kind of, get into compliance once we get to that final drafts, which I still think is going to take a little bit, especially after today's discussion. All right, it also looks like now we have a hand up from Rick Donnelly.
Good morning.
Morning.
And first, I'd like to congratulate Thomas on his new position. It's well deserved, and also for all the hard work that the staff has done on this complex issue that gets more complex as we go along, it seems like. I'd like to, first of all, make an observation that with the question of advertising, there's a distinct difference between advertising and paid advertising, I think, with respect to this subject. Our concern would be anything that would permit a paid advertisement. Let's take, for instance, a manufacturer buying advertising on a ordering platform. Also, with the same prohibition of a distributor buying advertising maybe on a third-party platform. Now, if a manufacturer, sends a banner ad to a distributor and the distributor decides to place it on a ordering platform, I think that's entirely different. And I think any clarification along that line would be helpful. But another issue that I think we haven't touched on yet is the data and the mining of that data. And I think we need to have some clarifying language that makes it very, very clear that there is no way that anybody is entitled to competitors' data. And I'm not sure we've really captured that yet. And I think any language that would make it clear that access to a competitor's data that's collected is prohibited.
Understood. No, I think that's a very good point. The data is something that we've kind of started to discuss in the background and recognize that that's something that needs to kind of be touched on. I will say, there's already a lot of information in here, so we can only do so much at one time, but that's something that we're going to continue to talk about internally. And I think that's a really good point of including some information about kind of data. I think also we need to get a better grasp internally, with talking to external stakeholders about how that data is actually being used currently, because if we can understand that, that will really help us kind of put information into the advisory that I think would help everybody.
Thank you.
Of course. Looks like next hand up is from Bob Budoff. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
That's okay, it's Budoff, but that's fine. Good morning, and thanks for providing this opportunity, and congratulations to Thomas. I wanted to go back to something that Tyler Rudd mentioned, because we've had a similar issue that we're wrestling with, the use of all the terms in the advisory: platforms, storefronts, retailers branded website. We had that on the October one also. And particularly in your introductory comment, when you stated, I thought you stated that suppliers advertising could be on a web page if it wasn't a page that had, and I don't know if page was the word you used. Once again, it's all these terms, but whether a supplier's ad would be able to be on a page on a unlicensed third-party multi-platform website, as long as it wasn't on a page where the retailer's name or ad did not appear. Is that correct?
That is what I stated. Yeah, and I guess what we were thinking with that is one, I know that there's a lot of terms of art that gets used in there, and we were trying to use, I guess, just terms that were somewhat all encompassing, because, you know, some of this, you have this happening just on a website, like if you just go to Google and type it into the internet page, and then some of it, you know, there's platforms operating on, you know, that you download from the App Store on your cell phone and stuff. So we're trying to use terms that kind of cover all those multiple instances, so we can go back and look at some of that. But with some of these platforms that are unlicensed, you know, there is clear avenues that would be able to have some advertising that's paid by an upper tier member. A, because they are unlicensed, and B, if there is no connection to a retailer or no connection to actually facilitating the sales to a specific retailer, that in our mind, I think that kind of almost equates to just general advertising on the internet, which is clearly allowed, and something that the agency really couldn't prohibit, because upper tier members are definitely allowed to do that. Hopefully that gives a little bit of clarification, but if not, please let me know.
It does, and it's helpful, and it's actually more consistent with the position that we have than what we thought you were saying, because what we're really concerned about is treating these unlicensed third-party websites with multi-sided platforms to treat that entire website as an extension of the retailer's physical premise, because we don't see it applicable, because these third-party websites may be open to all similarly situated retailers, and not only to a specific retailer or a limited group of retailers. So we were, you know, I know we've discussed this previously, you know, our perspective was, let's not talk about extending the retailer's physical premise. We don't think it really works. Let's just look at developing criteria to determine whether the website places retailer independence at risk. And you know, we have a few criteria that we would suggest, and I think they're consistent with 45-110, the unlawful inducement rule. You know, basically that all similarly situated retailers in a local market to determine whether retailer independence has been placed at risk. I'm sorry, I should have said that preliminarily. The factors would be whether all similarly situated retailers in a local market may sell their products through the unlicensed third-party website on the same terms. And that comes right out of 45-110, really. Whether supplier advertising or payment for advertising on the platform is independent of facilitating retailer sales through the website. And whether there's an express or an implied agreement between a supplier, a retailer, and or an unlicensed third party to provide direct or indirect payment from a supplier to a retailer, or to condition the facilitating of retailer sales and supplier advertising on each other. So, you know, applying those criteria, if the website is open to all similarly situated retailers and the supplier's advertising is separate from and not connected to the facilitating of retailer sales, then we think there's no basis to find that the retailer's independence is placed at risk. We don't really think we need to be looking at whether to extend the retailer's brick and mortar premise, that analysis really would really cover the concerns, the tight house concerns, and also not unnecessarily restrict what are really competitive and pro-competitive and pro-consumer websites that are really generally permitted throughout the country. So that is our approach on it.
Okay, perfect. No, I think those are some really good points. Thank you. Looks like next hand up is Marcus Schwartz.
Hi, Matthew. Marcus Schwartz here, Bracken Schwartz PLC. First of all, thank you for having taking this leap of faith, so to speak. Technology is very difficult, as we all know, and I don't think any of us really necessarily understand all the underpinnings. So it's very much, I don't know, it's a process. And so I do appreciate you doing that. And secondly, I'm going to apologize in advance because this may be long-winded, but stick with me. And I'm going to try to go through the bulletin in order and pick out some specific issues or things that I see. So starting from the top, so to speak, page 2, introduction, last sentence. Thus, holders of a retail tier license permit must be mindful of any unlicensed third party who manages, operates an online storefront or marketplace that facilitates alcohol sales on behalf of the retailer. As that could run afoul of the code. You know, I think fundamentally, what does facilitate alcohol sales on behalf of the retailer mean here in relation to third parties? There's a bunch of different models. Some are, you know, handling for retailers effectively, other third parties, you know, an example of that where the third parties connect consumers to other TBC permittees like retailers and allow orders to be made and passed through to permittees. I think, you know, those clearly facilitate alcohol sales. But then you've got third parties that, for instance, host, maintain websites, handle advertising for digital platforms that, frankly, without those sites wouldn't function properly. And so an indirect causation, I would say, is facilitating alcohol, but I don't think that is the main goal or even, you know, intention of either party. And I think we, you know, those need to be treated differently, and there's different, you know, regulatory hurdles, so to speak, for each one. Moving on, page 3, dual platform sales combined with supplier advertising, generally prohibited things of value and inducements. Last sentence, a promotion or service, whether or not facilitated by an unlicensed third party, whereby an industry member basically does a slotting fee thing, may be viewed as securing an interest in retailer's property, and a payment made to the retailer for rendering a display service is in violation. You know, one thing I note is, you know, if we're doing these e-commerce things and, you know, applying it in sort of a physical perspective, is what's the difference between this and a billboard, for instance? Your agency has said that third-party billboard companies can rent space on a retailer's premises and can carry upper tier advertising as long as those upper tier funds don't make it to the retailer. And so if you have digital ads run by third parties and the upper tier funds don't make it directly or indirectly with retailer, then what's the difference there? Another thing is, you know, generally this digital ad space, it's not static or limited in space like, you know, physical in-store shelves. So notwithstanding, you know, giving this something of value aspect, I think we recognize the evil of slotting fees is that, you know, it unfairly, you know, doles out shelf space to detriment of other competitors. Whereas with digital advertising, that's not necessarily the case. These things can rotate through every few seconds, and it's effectively of infinite space. And so it's hard to, it's not an apples to apple comparison. And it's to some extent a disservice to where the world is headed to view it in terms of physical space. And somewhat in that regard, moving on, page 4, inducement provisions related to or extend to online platforms, second sentence. The online platform marketplace is considered an extension of the retailer's premises. You know, no one owns the internet, so to speak. And to think of a platform in terms of physical real estate, I think can lead to unintended consequences. You know, let's say someone has a comment section or review of a product, right? And, you know, you get some trolls out there that say, no, I disagree with you, I'm going to shoot you, right? If that's the retailer's premises, then that's threatening another person, and that's a breach of the peace. Or if you get some hacker that's destroying property, right? Destroy the website, that's a breach of the peace. Does that require reporting? You know, what if a retailer has hundreds of permits? Is they going to have to file hundreds of breaches report? You know, I don't think we're headed there, but, you know, when we make some broad statements, it can carry unintended consequences. And, you know, another thing I'll say on this is, and this is how I understand it works in the real world, like you, I say, you know, I know just enough about technology to be dangerous, but a lot of times, as I understand it, often neither the retailers nor anyone else necessarily knows where an ad is going to run. Upper tier members or whoever's placing it can certainly put, parameters on where it should run, but they don't know exactly where it's going to run all the time. A lot of people that advertise, they use a third-party media company who then talks to a third-party advertising placement company. And these third-party, advertisers, they have specific proprietary placement IP that they're not going to share with anyone. It's like a Google search, right? When you search with Google, only Google knows what's going to pop up, and they're not going to tell anybody because that's valuable information for them. And so to some extent, it's like placing an advertisement on the radio or in a newspaper, right? We don't know where it's actually physically going to be heard or physically going to be seen. So policing aspects of, retailer up tier platform as if they were, physical space, again, can be problematic. Moving on, pages 4 and 5, digital advertisements are akin to in-store signs. It's the last sentence of page 4 that then completes at the start of page 5. However, in the context of liquor, 45-117 doesn't allow signs to be placed in a manner as provided by beer, but it has to be advertising specialty. Well, under that rule, advertising specialties, you get $125 per brand per calendar year. How do you even come up with a value when we're talking advertisements and digitally? Most upper tier members or just wholesalers or whoever, they place these with, third-party advertising firms, and then they place it. Let's say it's a $10,000 ad. It's a nationwide buy. Again, and a lot of times, upper tier members aren't even going to know where these things are going to be run exactly. So how do you determine $125 per store? Are they going to have to physically go to the third party and say, okay, where exactly are these going to be run? 10,000 stores. Okay, I divide the 10,000 by 10,000 stores. Okay, how many are in Texas? What if it's some TV that's in the store and the store's open 24 hours and that ad cycles through 4 times? What if another one only happens 1 time? Is there a difference in value if it's only shown one place at a retailer versus another retailer that shows it 4 times? It can become very unwieldy when we look at it in terms of an advertising specialty, I'd just say. Page 5, digital advertisements are akin to in-store signs, first full sentence. Thus, advertisements of liquor products qualify as a sign must be initiated, placed, or controlled by the retailer exclusively. Now, I'm not sure what's meant by initiated. To me, that means that the retailer needs to reach out to the upper tier member for such advertisements, but that's certainly not how it happens today with physical signs. The upper tier members approach the retailers to give them signs, and the retailer decides, yeah, I want this sign or I don't, or here's where I'm going to put the sign. So I don't know if initiated is necessarily the right word there. Page 5, digital advertisements are akin to in-store signs. The next to last sentence. In essence, once provided, the retailer must have full control over the advertisement signs placement. Again, this goes to how I don't think platforms actually really work that way. It's an easy thing to do in the physical world or even in radio or media where you have 1 or 2 people, right? But, platforms on the internet, they're dependent upon a bunch of different interconnected technologies provided by a bunch of different parties, and they all have to work together in harmony. And to say full control in this context is very difficult, next to impossible. As I've said, technology is different, and virtually always some third party is going to be utilized one way or the other, whether it's a website builder or maintainer or an advertising company. And no matter what happens, these third parties are never going to be fully controlled. They have their own IP. They're not going to share it. It's difficult to, have these broad sweeping statements and strict mandates when you view it through that type of prism. Page 5, strict prohibition on special advertising or advertising services, first paragraph. Third parties who control or manage the content appearing on a retailer's website platform on the retailer's behalf, who at the same time accept funds from upper-tier members, may conduct their operations in a manner that effectively creates a marketplace for producers to purchase advertising space. This is a special advertising service and prohibited in so many words. In previous sections, the commission and the bulletin states that digital ads can be thought of as physical signs. Again, what about the billboard example? That's a little different. Or take another example, magazines or newspapers, oftentimes, or at least in the past, right? Print is a dying media, as some people say. These magazines bought shelf space or paid rental fees to have their little magazine, thing on a retailer premises. And guess what? They're taking upper tier funds. But I don't think the commission has ever had a problem with any of this because the upper tier funds aren't making it to the retailer, much like billboards. And again, a lot of third-party advertisers that are managing these websites, they're not unique to a specific retailer. They run these same ads on thousands of businesses, many of which aren't in Texas. And so it's hard to say that it's a special advertising for a retailer if it's a scatter shot in thousands of places and no retailers getting funds related to the same. Again, I've said this, but a lot of times people don't know where these ads are going to be placed. It's going to present a problem for whoever's placing the ads and retailers. I like to liken it to TV, right? Bar pays, direct TV to show games. Direct TV's buying programming from television stations. Television stations are selling ads to upper tier members. And then those television ads from upper tier members are playing at retail locations. I don't think this is a problem, but those are technically digital advertisements because TV is now digital. Now, do both upper tier members and retailers knows that advertising ads are going to be played at their accounts? Yeah, but the funds aren't going to the retailer to place this or, paying retailers for running the ads. And a lot of websites operate similarly, where you have retailers paying a third party to produce, maintain a website, who then is, running another third party advertising service, and they get paid with upper tier funds. So there's some parallels there. And so I just recommend the commission be cognizant of that. And I understand the argument that websites can be specifically tailored to individual retailers. And so this could, potentially be more of a problem. But, in reality, most websites aren't necessarily built from the ground up. Website managers or builders have a standard suite of customizations that the retailer then says, I want this font, I want these colors, here's the product and the pricing that I'm going to enter, but you handle all this stuff. The retailers, for instance, they can control the area of a page where advertisements show up, but a lot of times they aren't controlling the actual ads. Again, to TV, here's an example. I have a bar and I have closed circuit TV, right? And I decide 50% of the time, or it's not all closed circuit, but 50% of the time, closed circuit, I'm gonna run ads for myself, right? But the other 50% of the time, I'm gonna let TV play. And some of those TV are gonna have alcohol ads. It's somewhat analogous here. Gas station video screens that have alcohol advertising, but are run by third parties. To some extent, that's the same. Moving on, page 5, strict prohibition of special distribution or advertising services, last sentence paragraph. The interpretation of the above cited code and rule provisions is not meant to preclude all online advertising funded by an upper tier member that appears on an e-commerce website or platform. the advertisement is not connected to or displayed with a retailer branded website or section, it will generally not be an inducement, blah, 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 blah. I think a key phrase here is not connected, but as noted, previously, connection and where specifically ads are run, displayed can be very difficult to police. Here, and moving on more generally, as I think we know, technology is going into weird places, but digital advertisements in relation to PEFs, there's delivery companies moving into PEFs now, and they have PEFs, specific things where, some runner's going to go to the concourse, pick up a beer and deliver it to your site. How is this going to work in terms of PEFs where PEFs have exceptions? Are they going to go all out the window as long as the independent concessionaire and basic framework is kept? Or what's going to happen there? Can venue owners get some of these advertising funds? Could upper tier members, freely purchase ad space without restriction on these PF related platform pages? I think that's something to think about.
As if we
Generally,
didn't have enough, Marcus, now you want to bring up PEFs.
well, it's my job, Matthew.
I fully understand.
And I generally say, and this has been alluded to in previous questions, but this thought of, unlicensed entities providing services as technologies as an agent of, or, on behalf of a retailer, and they don't have a permit. So should they really be doing this? The one parallel I draw on this it's not really new. Think of credit cards. They've been around for decades. And, when we think of credit cards, we just think of them handling the monetary transaction, but that's involving credit card companies, financial institutions, cardholder bank, merchant bank. It's not just money going straight from the consumer to the retailer. But I don't think anyone thinks credit card companies are actually selling alcohol or collecting alcohol funds, and it certainly hasn't been done that way. Credit card companies are agnostic to the transaction, whether it's alcohol or anything else. And so to the extent, and I think you've got pointed on this, the platforms that are merely transactional or, aren't going above and beyond, it's just a variation of what's happening today. It's just in a different format. There was a comment, or this does go more to specifics, but lastly, TABC does not see an avenue for platforms to touch all three tiers to lawfully operate. What is touching all three tiers here? If you've got advertising from an upper tier member and it's between a wholesaler and a retailer, potentially that's touching all three tiers. But what if it's segregated? So, the supplier doesn't see the middle tier retailer interactions, and the retailer doesn't see the middle tier supplier interactions. I think there are ways that this could be done in the spirit of what's happened traditionally. Again, as long as we're not doing pay to play, and as was stated, no one's seeing other people's data, things kind of along those issues. Something just generally, and I don't think this would be a problem, but can e-commerce ordering systems platforms provide for discounts compared to physical locations? I think everyone knows that, a lot of the reason we're using these technologies is it cuts down on labor costs. And so presumably you're lowering your cost to do business, and you should be able to pass those savings along down the line. Just something to think about. And finally, again, somewhat on advertisements and premium advertisements, banner ads, placements. I think it's somewhat difficult to enforce from a practical perspective. Say some third party is going to do an ad, right? And they decide, oh, we're going to charge a whole lot of money for this banner placement, right? And effectively, it's going to weed out a lot of the competition and say only one or two people advertise. Is that then going to be a premium advertisement? Is there a specific number of people that could do it or couldn't do it before it becomes a problem? Can a third party sell different tiers of advertisements on a website? You know, there's a top banner, it costs more than a side banner. Is, you know, it's placement in terms of real estate on a website, but it's not placement in terms of exactly where and under what categories necessarily it could be seen on a page. And it's not really akin to shelf space, again, as there's no real limit on the amount of times a banner could cycle or who could be, you know, shown. You know, another thing, do ad placement have to be really random? I mean, say a bunch of people advertise, or say it's just 3, right? And I decide, you know, hey, advertiser 1, you were first in time. Advertiser 2, you were second time. Advertiser 3, you were third in time. And so I'm going to do the first advertiser's ad first, the second person's second, the third person's third. Is that preferential treatment? I don't think it is, but it becomes difficult in terms of policing, I would say. You know, and it's not really different, right? You know, the small breweries that have limited production runs, right? And they only have 2 kegs to sell to retail. You know, to some extent that's been done because you can't, you know, especially, you know, sell exclusive outlets, right? But, you know, when you only have 1 or 2 products, it's not an exclusive outlet. That's just what the marketplace is. Follow me? So to some extent, it's not new. It's just a new realm that this is being applied for or to. And with that, I will now shut up.
No, I mean, I think that was a lot of good information. There's kind of 2 things I'd like to maybe respond to on here, because I think it's kind of been brought up before, and it's the stuff in the advisory, or at least the draft right now, where we're equating the kind of online space or internet-based space to the physical premises. And I'll just let everyone know kind of some of the hurdles that we're having and why we feel like we have to look at it that way and try to go down that route. It's because, you know,
the insurance, you're not on the insurance yet. So do I have your driver's license info?
Excuse me. It looks like Ryan DeHart, if you can hear me, you are not muted. Sorry. Okay. All right. So one of the reasons that we're looking at kind of equating this online realm to the physical space and extending the actual brick and mortar area to online is because we do have 2 provisions in the code, one specifically for all permits and the other for all licenses. And both of those state that all of the privileges that are granted under the license or permit cannot be used at any place except for the actual address, premises, or location for what that permit or license is issued. So, you know, looking at those 2 statutes, it's difficult to kind of not equate this to the physical area, because the other kind of option I see that the agency would have would be to say, no, none of this online is allowed at all. And obviously, you know, we're not going to do that, and that's not something we want to do. But there are 2 kind of code provisions that we've had to look at that do kind of confine some of this. You know, and maybe we can kind of tweak this, obviously, and look at some of this differently. But I just wanted to point that out to people, especially as you're going back and looking at this more after this meeting, that, you know, there is some stuff in the code that obviously when it was written, the internet was just never envisioned. And so that kind of makes it somewhat difficult. We are trying to fit square pegs in round holes with some of this. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on specifically, Marcus, to your comments, was the stuff about 45-117 in the advertising specialties. That is something that we already recognized and looked at. And at the last commission meeting, the commissioners did vote to propose an amendment to that rule specifically to align all of the signage stuff in 45-117 to the same way that it operates under 45-113 for malt beverages. So I think that's something that'll help a whole lot with not having to look at this whole dollar limitation thing. So I just wanted to point that out and kind of remind everybody that that was actually formally voted to be proposed. So next step would be adoption. So hopefully that gets done, and that kind of could clear up some of that stuff within the advisory. But overall, thank you for comments. I mean, I'm making a lot of notes. There's just a lot of good information. It looks like the next hand up that we have is Rachel Hooper.
Hi, good morning. Is it still morning? Yes. Good
That's
morning.
still, well, I guess depending on what side of the country you're on.
I'm Rachel Hooper in Houston, Texas from Baker Hostetler. Congratulations, Director Graham. Thank you so much, Matthew. I've already submitted CLE based on Mr. Bracken and Mr. Schwartz's presentation. So thank you. I come at this, I've reviewed the draft advisory. I'm not an expert in alcoholic beverage law. I'm not an expert in digital advertising, but I have a lot of questions. And I just pulled up the governor's economic development website where he talks about Texas offering companies of all sizes and all industries one of the best business climates in the nation with fair, transparent tax and regulatory structure. And what I am hearing is a lot of confusion based on this advisory. And so that's where my questions come from. I asked some questions earlier via the chat. Other questions I have relates to what about social media? How will this work with paid social media ads? What about advertising situations where no money changes hands between and among the tiers? I think that the attendance today shows that a lot of people are looking to Texas on this, and I'm wondering if an advisory is the best vehicle here. Is this something that requires more research? I know you have worked so hard, so please, respectfully, I feel like we're at a situation where we really need to dive in and conduct more of a survey, wide ranging, and the impact, and maybe put this forth during the session or after. I'm just nervous about Texas. I'm happy for Texas to be a leader, and we are such a leader for business, but I don't want to see us rush out regulation unnecessarily that impacts a lot of people. And just, when advisories aren't clear and they're confusing, then that leads to litigation. I don't want to see that either. So I just respectfully, those are my comments based on what I'm seeing and hearing. And but I really appreciate the opportunity and the transparency of the agency to have us here today and conduct this meeting. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for those comments. And I will say I completely agree. I do not want any extra litigation for my agency. And also, I want to add that the intent of this is not to kind of create something that is effectively a new rule, but the purpose of the advisory is the agency's kind of best way to take a specific topic or scenario and tell the industry how we would apply the current code and rules to that scenario or to that specific topic. And part of this process with drafting it and having these stakeholder meetings is so we can make it any less confusing as possible and get that feedback from industry. This is not something that we definitely want to just push out there quickly. So we, like Thomas was saying earlier, we're definitely going to have a whole nother draft and keep looking at this. So just your comments do not fall on deaf ears at all. We are fully kind of committed to taking the time to make this right, and that may take a while. It may take many months, and maybe that does bleed into session, and that spawns something that can kind of make stuff a little bit more clear and give some guidelines statutorily. So we'll see, but again, definitely we are kind of in this for the long haul and want to get it right. I think that actually was our last hand that, oh, nope. One more hand just popped up, Miss Amy Harrison.
Now, when could I ever go without speaking, Matthew? First of all, I want to say just how proud I am that Texas, specifically TABC, is being a lead in this area and addressing it head on when it's very clear, it's complex. It's very clear that there are a lot of unknowns out there for regulators and for those that want to participate in advertising. So with that, I'm very proud and I'm very, very grateful. The other thing that I want to say is probably directed at some of my colleagues and their comments, but I would say that just because something's out there doesn't mean that it's lawful, and it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's good for us. The other thing that I would say is software is without a doubt of value. To say software has no value is insane. Let's look at Ames. Ames is a software platform, and software has value. And if I am a retailer, obviously I'm going to use a software that is easier, a software that assists me, that I don't have to spend a lot of time with. It doesn't cost me my time. So software and its presentation is without a doubt of value. Data is driving every bit of this. And those that want to pretend it's not is just pretending, because every bit of this advertising at the end of the day is about the data and its value and who it goes to and who it's sold to or provided to, because data, just like software, has value. I appreciate the bright lines that you're trying to create for simplicity's sake, because at the end of the day, most retailers can't even afford the people that are on this call. I mean, let's just be honest. Some of them can't even afford to join the associations to help them with their regulation. So anything that you can do to create bright lines, not only for the simplicity of the permit holders and their understanding, but your own staff. I mean, at the end of the day, your staff has to be able to regulate this. And if you create something that's confusing and has loopholes and such, it's confusing for them too. So I appreciate very much your simplicity in trying to create this. And I think that this is a process and it's going to take time, but I also think you're absolutely on the right course. And then to talk about an advisory as it relates to resources and work. I have decades of experience, and I, as you know, had an advertiser, and as confident as I was about their program being lawful, I still came to you for that rubber stamp. And that took time, but it got that rubber stamp, which in turn allowed my client to go to these retailers that are uneducated in great number, and go to wholesalers or distributors or whoever and say, look, I got a program that's been rubber stamped as it is at that time. And I don't want to discount the value of that. I know it's difficult for the agency, and in some ways, under current staffing, may even be impossible. But at the same point, I think there is such value in your rubber stamp and showing what models have met the criteria and why they met that criteria, because then it's a guideline for everybody else that comes after. So again, that's all I have to say. I certainly don't want to be accused of helping anybody get their CLE powers. So thank you for your time. And once again, you all make me very proud. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments. I do want to add clarification. I do know what you're talking about and the company that we were able to approve. And I'd just like to point out to everybody on the phone call, that was a marketing program and not a e-commerce platform at all. We have not told anyone at all that, yes, you have an e-commerce platform and this looks great and can't violate the law at all. I just want to add that clarification piece in there because I think that's very important for everyone on the call right now.
Yeah, you were absolutely right. And I didn't mean to misguide anybody, but I do want to say how valuable your rubber stamp is. So with that, I appreciate it.
We appreciate the comments. It looks like Jackie has her hand raised again.
Yeah, I apologize for speaking again, but as I've been listening to some of these comments, I've just been shaking my head at some of these things that just really don't relate to this advisory at all. People have been talking about billboards, making comparison from billboards. A billboard is not something that a consumer can click on and have an item placed in their cart, charged to and delivered to them. Nobody can make a purchase from a billboard. That is not an analogy that we should be talking about. And there's also been this notion that keeps on being put out there today that these massive suppliers that have mega marketing e-commerce departments and spend millions, and they know where every impression is going. That's their job, to track this, that they suddenly don't know what they're doing, that this is so complicated that suppliers can't figure it out. I think that is extremely disingenuous. So I hear Amy and Lance completely that retailers are not expected to know all of this, but the notion that massive suppliers who spend millions upon millions on e-commerce advertising every year don't know what they're doing is just not right.
Appreciate that, Herb. Yep. All right, looks like Tyler, you have your hand up again? Tyler Rudd, not Tyler's Liquor Store.
Yes, sorry, I'll make this real quick. Just something that I forgot to add when I was speaking earlier. The second part, the business to business, one of the things we would like to see is for the rules that apply regarding slotting fees, et cetera, for the business to commerce, we would also like to see that applied to business to business to ensure that nothing nefarious happens on that level.
Right, okay,
I don't
that
know,
makes
it's very
perfect sense.
vague, but yeah.
But to me, it sounds like you're saying you just would like something added in there to make it very clear to that kind of segment of the platform, segment of the industry, that slotting fees are still a prohibited thing in that area.
That's right.
Perfect. Okay. Yep. All right. It looks like that is all the hands that we have raised. There was one additional question that came in. It looks like it's from Jeff Carroll. He was asking, if an unlicensed e-commerce platform is registered as a marketplace facilitator to collect and remit sales tax in Texas, would it be permissible for that marketplace to keep the sales tax portion of funds collected from a consumer and pass the balance down to the licensee? California has allowed this practice via advisory. That's something that we could look at. At the moment, I think it kind of goes a little bit beyond what we were trying to do currently right now within this, and kind of splitting up the collection of funds would be an issue with the prior advisory that we issued, I think back in 2012 or 2013, that gets referenced in here. And I want to say, yeah, that's MPA 056. But I will definitely try to take a look at what California has done via that advisory and see if there's anything within there that we can kind of discuss further internally and maybe incorporate or implement within Texas if it works. But that's something we'll definitely look at. Oh, and it looks like we did get one more question. Oh, from Bob Hubbard. Okay, sorry, Bob. All right, is the draft bulletin and oh no, we did answer that one. We got that one. Yep. All right, if anyone has any additional questions or wants to raise their hand, I'll use an industry term here and it's last call. All right, it looks like we don't have anybody. I would just really like to say how appreciative the agency is for everyone taking time out of your day to attend today, and especially everyone that commented or raised their hand and spoke. I find that all of this extremely helpful. And like we were saying earlier, this is something we are committed to. We want to get it right. And we're not on a fast track. We just want to, engage with the industry further. So if anyone was watching and didn't get a chance to say something that they want to, please feel free to reach out to Thomas or Andrea or myself, or send in a written comment. We definitely want to engage with as many people on this topic as we can. That being said, thank you again, everyone, for attending, and y'all have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.